"You will be hearing from my lawyer," she shrieked, her voice cracking like stressed concrete under a seismic load. Her face was a blotchy, furious red, a stark contrast to the perfectly manicured, unnaturally green lawn of her showcase home. It was a fascinating study in pressure dynamics, watching a person's composure disintegrate in real time. I almost felt the need to take notes. But this was the end of the story, or close to it. To understand how we got here, how a quiet structural engineer ended up in a screaming match with the self-appointed queen of suburbia, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to when I thought moving here was a good idea. After my wife, Sarah, passed away, the old house felt less like a home and more like a museum of a life that was no longer mine. Every room echoed with her absence. So, my daughter, Chloe, and I moved. We found a place in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood called Oakhaven Estates. It seemed perfect. The houses were well-maintained, the streets were clean, and the homeowners association, according to the realtor, was proactive in maintaining community standards. That should have been my first red flag. Proactive is just a polite word for intrusive. I'm a structural engineer. I work from home, designing retrofits for historical buildings and consulting on complex foundation issues. It's quiet work. It's precise work. It involves blueprints, calculations, and the satisfying certainty of physics. My life was built around predictable stresses and manageable loads. I crave order, not chaos. For the first few months, Oakhaven was exactly the peaceful sanctuary I'd hoped for. Chloe was settling into her new school, and I was finding a rhythm in the quiet hum of my home office. The silence was a balm. I started to feel like we could build a new foundation here, just the two of us. And then I met Brenda. Brenda was the president of the Oakhaven HOA. She wasn't elected in any way I could discern. She seemed to have ascended to the throne through sheer force of will and an inexhaustible supply of passive-aggressive newsletters. She was a woman in her mid-50s, with a helmet of blonde hair that looked like it could withstand a Category 3 hurricane and a smile that never quite reached her cold, calculating eyes. She introduced herself by leaving a laminated, multi-page document titled, Oakhaven Community Covenants and You, A Guide to Harmonious Living, taped to my front door. It was less of a guide and more of a legal threat disguised with clip art of smiling families. My first official interaction with her was over a delivery. I'd ordered some specialized surveying equipment, and it arrived on a flatbed truck. The driver was professional, quiet, and gone within 15 minutes. It was a non-event. Or so I thought. The next morning, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line, in all caps, read, Unauthorized Commercial Activity. The email, from Brenda, was a masterpiece of condescending prose. It informed me that Oakhaven Estates was a strictly residential community. Commercial deliveries of that scale and nature were not permitted without prior written approval from the HOA board, which was, coincidentally, just her. She attached a grainy photo of the truck, taken from her front window across the street, like a sniper documenting a target. I was fined $200. I read the email twice, my initial annoyance giving way to a sense of weary disbelief. I was a professional working from a home office, not running a smelting plant in my garage. I typed a polite, logical reply. I explained the nature of my work, cited the relevant section of the bylaws which made no mention of delivery truck size, and respectfully stated that I would not be paying the fine. Her response came back in under 5 minutes. The bylaws are subject to board interpretation. The fine stands. A late fee of $50 per day will be applied. It was like arguing with a brick wall, if a brick wall could type in Comic Sans. I decided to ignore it. A ridiculous fine based on a non-existent rule wasn't a legitimate debt. It was an attempt to establish dominance, to mark her territory. I wasn't interested in playing her game. That was my second mistake. With people like Brenda, you are always in the game, whether you want to be or not. The fines began to accumulate, a running tally of absurdity listed in her monthly newsletters, which were now being left on my doorstep like a dead bird from a cat. Resident at 112 Oak Drive, outstanding fines for covenant violations, $1,450. She never used my name, just my address, turning my home into a public exhibit of alleged delinquency. My neighbors, most of whom were perfectly pleasant people, started giving me nervous looks. A few of them stopped me while I was getting the mail, whispering their own stories of Brenda's tyranny. One guy, a retired cop named Frank, told me he was fined for his garbage can being visible from the street for more than 4 hours after pickup. Another woman was cited because her daughter's chalk drawings on the sidewalk were deemed unapproved graffiti. They were all intimidated. They paid the fines, kept their heads down, and hoped the eye of Brenda would pass over them. They saw her as an unmovable force, a feature of the landscape like a badly placed telephone pole. You just learn to live with it. But I'm an engineer. I don't just live with structural problems, I analyze them, find their weaknesses, and fix them. The conflict escalated. She started taking pictures of my car, a sensible sedan, claiming it was a commercial vehicle because I sometimes drove it to job sites. She sent me a formal warning about the excessive noise from my keyboard, a claim so ludicrous I had to assume she was just making things up for sport. I continued to ignore the fines and the emails, filing them away in a digital folder I labeled the Brenda problem. I was trying to be the bigger person, to rise above the pettiness. I had more important things to worry about, like helping Chloe with her algebra homework and making sure we had milk for breakfast. The turning point came on a Saturday afternoon. It was a beautiful spring day, and Chloe had a friend over. They were in the backyard, laughing and practicing for a school play. I was in my office, reviewing a set of blueprints for a library in Boston, when I heard a commotion. I looked out the window and saw Brenda standing on the edge of my property, her arms crossed, her face a mask of indignation. She was yelling at my 12-year-old daughter. I was out the door in seconds, my heart pounding a rhythm of pure, cold fury. Completely unacceptable. Brenda was saying as I approached. This is a quiet community, not a public theater. Your shrieking is disturbing the peace. Chloe and her friend were standing there, frozen, their faces pale with shock and fear. Brenda, I said, my voice dangerously calm. What do you think you're doing? She turned to me, her eyes flashing. I am enforcing the community noise ordinance. These children are being a public nuisance. They're children, I said, stepping between her and my daughter. They're playing in their own backyard. You are on my property. Leave. Now. This is not over, she hissed, backing away. You people have no respect for the rules. No respect at all. I watched her march back to her house across the street, a self-righteous storm in a pastel tracksuit. I turned back to Chloe, who was on the verge of tears. I hugged her tight, my mind racing. This was no longer about stupid fines or petty rules. She had crossed a line. She had brought my child into it. She had made my daughter feel unsafe in her own home. That night, after Chloe was asleep, I sat in my office and stared at the digital folder labeled the Brenda problem. My initial strategy of passive resistance had failed. It had only emboldened her. Ignoring a structural flaw doesn't make it go away, it just allows the pressure to build until the whole thing collapses. Brenda wasn't just a nuisance, she was a threat to the peaceful life I was trying to build for my family. The time for being the bigger person was over. It was time to be the smarter engineer. I opened a new file on my computer. I named it Project Demolition. My first step was to approach the problem methodically, just as I would with a failing structure. I needed data. I needed to understand the system I was dealing with. I spent the entire weekend reading every single document related to the Oakhaven Estates HOA. The covenants, the bylaws, the meeting minutes going back 5 years. I read them until my eyes burned. It was exactly as I suspected. The rules were vague, poorly written, and full of loopholes. They were designed to grant maximum discretionary power to the board, which consisted of Brenda as president, and 2 of her obvious cronies as treasurer and secretary. Their interpretation was law, simply because no one had ever had the fortitude to challenge it. The section on commercial activity was a single sentence prohibiting the operation of a retail business from a residence. It said nothing about home offices, consulting, or the types of vehicles used for deliveries. Her entire case against me was built on sand. The next phase was surveillance. Not of her, but of my own property. I wasn't interested in her private life, I was interested in documenting her harassment of mine. I ordered 4 high-resolution, weatherproof security cameras. I installed them myself, positioning them to cover my entire front yard, my driveway, my porch, and the street in front of my house. The coverage overlapped perfectly with the front of Brenda's house. It was a net of digital eyes, recording everything in crystal clear 4K. I also started a log. Every email, every newsletter, every passive-aggressive note left on my door was scanned, dated, and filed. Every time she stood on her porch and glared at my house, I made a note of the time. Every time she drove past my house, slowing down to peer into my windows, I logged it. It felt obsessive, but I knew that in any conflict, documentation is ammunition. My retired cop neighbor, Frank, saw me installing the cameras. He wandered over, a cup of coffee in his hand. "Preparing for war?" he asked, a wry smile on his face. "Just documenting the local wildlife," I replied. He chuckled. "Her name is Brenda. And she's more than wild, she's venomous. Be careful. She doesn't just get mad, she gets even." "I'm an engineer, Frank," I said, tightening the last mounting screw. "I believe in stress testing." He told me more stories. About how she'd had a family's beloved dog taken away by animal control by filing a dozen false, vicious animal complaints. About how she tried to get a young couple's foster parent license revoked by inventing stories about wild parties. She wasn't just a stickler for rules, she was a malevolent bully who got a thrill from wielding power over others. This only strengthened my resolve. My project wasn't just about protecting my family anymore. It was about dismantling a corrupt system for the good of the entire community. With my defenses in place, I began my investigation into her. If I was going to fight her, I needed to know what I was up against. I started with public records, something I was very familiar with from my work. Property deeds, tax assessments, building permits. It was all online, if you knew where to look. Her house, 115 Oak Drive, was zoned R1, strictly single-family residential. That was interesting. I cross-referenced it with the city's business license database. No business licenses were registered to her name or her address. This was where things got strange. During the day, especially in the mornings and late afternoons, there was a steady stream of cars pulling up to her house. Mostly minivans and SUVs. Women would get out, drop off young children, and then drive away. In the evening, the process would reverse. It looked an awful lot like a daycare. A home daycare in an R1 zone would require a special use permit from the city. It would also require a state license, regular inspections from the Department of Health and Human Services, and, of course, a business license. And the income would have to be reported to the IRS. I started watching the camera feeds more closely. I used the motion-activated recording feature to create a time-lapse of the activity at her house. The pattern was undeniable. Monday through Friday, from roughly 7 in the morning until 6 at night, her house was a commercial enterprise. I could see 5, sometimes 6, different children being dropped off each day. State law was crystal clear: caring for more than one child from another family for compensation required a license. Brenda, the woman who fined me for a delivery truck based on her interpretation of the rules, was running an unlicensed, unregulated, and almost certainly untaxed business out of her home, in direct violation of city zoning ordinances, state law, and the very HOA covenants she lorded over everyone else. The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost beautiful, like a perfectly symmetrical crack in a collapsing dam. I now had a target. But I needed more than suspicion. I needed irrefutable proof. I couldn't just use my camera footage, that could be dismissed as circumstantial. I needed something solid, something official. My plan began to form, a multi-stage blueprint for deconstruction. Phase 1 was to continue gathering data. Phase 2 would be to bait her, to make her overplay her hand. Phase 3 would be the execution, the controlled demolition. She soon gave me the perfect opportunity for Phase 2. The HOA had a rule, a genuinely stupid one, that all lawn maintenance had to be completed between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. on weekdays. No weekend yard work. It was part of Brenda's Preserve Weekend Tranquility initiative. The following Saturday, I deliberately went outside and started my electric lawn mower at 8:59 a.m. I knew she was watching. I could feel her eyes on me from behind her pristine curtains. I mowed one single strip of my lawn. At precisely 9:01 a.m., I stopped, put the mower away, and went back inside. Less than an hour later, the email arrived. Violation of Weekend Tranquility Ordinance, another $200 fine. This time, she attached a picture of me, mowing that single strip, with a timestamp of 8:59 and 47 seconds a.m. I replied immediately. Brenda, the photo you sent clearly shows the violation occurred for a total of 13 seconds. I would also like to point out that your constant surveillance of my property and family is creating a hostile living environment. Please cease and desist. Her response was swift and incandescent with rage. You are a troublemaker. I am documenting your flagrant disregard for our community rules for a legal dossier. Pay your fines, or the consequences will be severe. I am reporting your home business to the city for zoning violations and to the IRS for potential tax fraud. We'll see how you like that. It was perfect. It was a declaration of war, in writing. She had just handed me the justification for everything I was about to do. She thought she was threatening me, but what she was really doing was kicking a hornet's nest while standing on a trapdoor. Thank you for putting that in writing, I replied, and then I blocked her email address. The next day, a certified letter arrived from the city's code enforcement office. A complaint had been filed against my address for running an illegal commercial operation in a residential zone. An inspector would be visiting my property in 2 weeks. Then came a letter from the IRS. A thick, intimidating envelope that could make any law-abiding citizen's blood run cold. It informed me that my tax filings for the past 3 years were being audited, based on an anonymous tip suggesting undeclared business income. She had actually done it. The sheer, malicious audacity of it was breathtaking. She was using government agencies as her personal weapons, all while committing the very same violations on a much grander scale. This was the final stress test. The point where a material either holds or fractures completely. I felt a strange calm settle over me. The emotional component was gone, replaced by the cold, clean logic of a complex engineering problem. She had escalated far beyond the confines of the HOA. Now, so would I. Project Demolition was officially a go. The first part of my plan was to deal with the immediate threats she had sicked on me. The city inspector was easy. I scheduled the appointment, and when he arrived, I welcomed him into my home. I showed him my office, which was just a spare bedroom with a desk, a computer, and a drafting table. I showed him my business license, my tax records, and my professional engineering license, all framed and hanging neatly on the wall. I explained that I was a consultant. I had no employees, no inventory, and no customers who came to my house. The only commercial activity was me, sitting at a computer. The inspector, a reasonable man named Henderson, was apologetic. I'm sorry to have wasted your time, he said, closing his notepad. We have to follow up on every complaint, but this is obviously baseless. The person who filed it claimed you had heavy machinery and dozens of employees here. I assumed the complaint was anonymous. I asked innocently. It was, he confirmed. But it came from a phone number registered to a Brenda Miller at 115 Oak Drive. Bingo. I thanked him for his time and made a careful note of his name and our conversation. One domino down. The IRS audit was more daunting, but I am meticulous by nature. My books were immaculate. Every invoice, every expense, every tax form was perfectly organized. I spent a week compiling a mountain of paperwork and sent it to the IRS with a polite, detailed cover letter. It was a hassle, a colossal waste of my time, but I knew I was clean. It was a weapon that couldn't hurt me. It would, however, look very bad for Brenda when it was revealed that she had filed a malicious, false report against a man whose finances were in perfect order. With my own defenses shored up, I moved to the offensive. It was time to build my case against her. I started by focusing on the daycare. I needed more than just my own camera footage. I needed testimony. I spent a few evenings doing some light social media reconnaissance. I found a local community Facebook group. A quick search for Brenda's name revealed a few scattered posts from years past, mostly her reminding people about lawn care rules. But then I found something interesting. A post from a young woman who was looking for daycare recommendations. One of the comments, from one of Brenda's known cronies, recommended a wonderful private caregiver in Oak Haven. It didn't mention Brenda by name, but it listed a phone number. I ran the number. It was Brenda's cell phone. I created a new, anonymous email account. I posed as a new resident, a single mother desperately looking for childcare. I emailed a few of the parents I had seen on my cameras, whose identities I had found through some clever online searching. I asked them about their experience with the private caregiver in Oakhaven. 2 of them replied. They praised her but noted that she was a bit unusual. Specifically, she only accepted payment in cash. No checks, no bank transfers. Cash only, every Friday, in a sealed envelope. That was the smoking gun for tax evasion. An all-cash business is the oldest trick in the book. My next move was to gather physical evidence. I needed to confirm the number of children in her care at any given time. According to state licensing regulations, the number of children determines the level of license required. Exceeding that number, even for a licensed facility, is a serious violation. For an unlicensed one, it was a catastrophe waiting to happen. I bought a drone. A small, quiet one with a high-resolution camera. My property had several large oak trees in the backyard, one of which provided a perfect, discreet vantage point over her backyard. On a Tuesday morning, I waited until all the children had been dropped off. I sent the drone up, hovering high above my own property line, using the zoom lens to get a clear view of her backyard. There they were. 8 children. 8 little kids, all under the age of 5, running around her yard. There was a small, dilapidated swing set and a plastic slide. Brenda was the only adult present. State law required a specific adult-to-child ratio. For that age group, it was 1 adult for every 4 children. She was supervising 8 children by herself. Double the legal limit, even if she had been licensed. And I knew she wasn't. I recorded for 10 minutes, capturing clear footage of all 8 children and Brenda. The footage was time-stamped and GPS-stamped to my drone's location, well within my property's airspace. It was legally obtained and utterly damning. I now had evidence of zoning violations, operating an unlicensed business, violating state childcare regulations, and, circumstantially, massive tax fraud. The foundation of her little empire was rotten to the core. It was time to place the charges. But I didn't go to the authorities yet. Not all of them. A full frontal assault wasn't my style. I preferred a more elegant approach. I wanted to use her own weapon, the HOA, against her. I wanted to dismantle her power base first, to isolate her before the final blow. The annual HOA meeting was in 3 weeks. It was usually a dull affair, attended only by Brenda and her 2 cronies, where they would rubber stamp her budget and congratulate themselves on another year of maintaining community standards. This year, it was going to be different. I spent the next 2 weeks talking to my neighbors. I started with Frank, the retired cop. I laid out my evidence for him on my kitchen table, the photos, the video logs from my cameras, the drone footage, the emails from the parents. He whistled, long and low. "Son, this isn't just a case of her being a pain in the neck. This is a laundry list of felonies. Tax evasion alone could get her serious time." "I know," I said. "But I want to handle the HOA aspect first. I want her removed as president. Publicly." Frank grinned. "I like your style. What do you need from me?" "I need you to talk to people," I said. "You know them better than I do. Show them this. Let them know they don't have to be afraid of her anymore. I want that meeting to be standing room only." He agreed without hesitation. Together, we were a good team. I was the data guy, the strategist. He was the people person, the one they trusted. We went door to door, not with flyers or petitions, but with quiet conversations. I presented the facts calmly and logically. I showed them how Brenda's fines were not only baseless but also applied selectively. I showed them the proof of her own, far more serious violations. The fear that had held the community in its grip for years began to crack. It was replaced by a slow-burning anger. People were tired of being bullied. They were tired of the constant threat of fines and harassment. All they needed was a leader and a plan. I gave them both. The day of the HOA meeting arrived. It was held in the small community clubhouse. Usually, you could count the attendees on one hand. That night, every single chair was filled. People were standing along the walls. Frank stood beside me near the front, giving me a solid, reassuring nod. Brenda and her 2 board members sat at a folding table at the front of the room. She looked surprised by the turnout, but her expression quickly hardened into one of annoyance. She clearly saw it not as community engagement, but as an affront to her authority. She banged a small gavel on the table. "Welcome to the annual Oakhaven Estates Homeowners Association meeting. Let's get started. First on the agenda is the budget." "Point of order, Madam President," I said, standing up. My voice was calm and clear, cutting through the murmuring room. Brenda glared at me. "You are not recognized." "According to Robert's Rules of Order, which are cited as the governing procedure in our bylaws, a point of order can be raised at any time," I countered smoothly. I held up a copy of the bylaws, a yellow sticky note marking the relevant page. She was momentarily flustered. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not on procedure. "What is your point?" she snapped. "My point is that this board is operating illegitimately," I said. The room went dead silent. The bylaws state that board members must be residents in good standing. That means all dues and fines must be paid. However, the board has been levying illegal fines, including thousands of dollars against me, for violations not supported by the covenants. Therefore, your claim that I am not in good standing is invalid." I continued, my voice steady. "Furthermore, the board president is engaged in ongoing, serious violations of the very covenants she is supposed to enforce, not to mention city ordinances and state law. That is an outrageous and slanderous accusation." Brenda shrieked, jumping to her feet. "You have no proof." "Oh, but I do," I said, pulling a USB stick from my pocket. "I have a great deal of proof. I had arranged with the clubhouse manager earlier to have a projector and screen set up." I walked to the front of the room, plugged the USB stick into the laptop, and the first image flashed onto the screen. It was a high-resolution photo from my camera, showing a parent dropping off a child at Brenda's front door, with a timestamp. I clicked to the next slide. Another parent, another child. And another. And another. I showed them a week's worth of drop-offs and pickups, a constant stream of commercial activity. Then I played the drone footage. The room was filled with gasps as the image of 8 small children in her backyard, supervised by one person, appeared on the screen. "This is a violation of city zoning R1, I explained calmly, as if giving a lecture. "It's a violation of state childcare licensing laws, which require a license and specific adult-to-child ratios for safety. This is an unlicensed, illegal daycare operating in the heart of our community." Brenda was sputtering, her face turning a deep shade of crimson. "This is an invasion of my privacy. You filmed my home. That's illegal." "Actually, it's not," Frank's voice boomed from the side of the room. All eyes turned to him. "As a retired police officer, I can assure you that there is no expectation of privacy for what is visible from a public street or from a neighboring property's airspace. Everything you see here was obtained legally." I clicked to the next slide. It was a screenshot of the email she had sent me, the one where she threatened to report me to the IRS. "And finally," I said, "we have this. While operating her own illegal, all-cash business to avoid paying taxes, our HOA president filed a fraudulent and malicious report against me with the IRS, costing me weeks of work and considerable stress. This is not just a violation of HOA rules. It's a federal crime." The room erupted. People were yelling, shouting questions at Brenda. Her 2 cronies on the board looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. Brenda, however, was not the type to shrink away. She was a cornered animal, and she came out fighting. "He's a liar," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He's a troublemaker who has been trying to undermine this community since the day he moved in. He harasses me. He stalks me. He's a danger to our children." Her accusations were wild, hysterical. She was throwing everything at the wall, hoping something would stick. But it was too late. Her credibility had been shattered like cheap glass. I had used facts, data, and evidence. She was using baseless, frantic accusations. "I move for a vote of no confidence in the current board and for their immediate removal," someone yelled from the back. "Seconded," came a chorus of voices. Brenda banged her gavel frantically. "This meeting is adjourned. It's out of order. Adjourned." She tried to grab her things, but the crowd was pressing in. She had lost the room. She had lost her power. But she hadn't lost her capacity for malice. The fallout from the meeting was immediate. The board was dissolved. A new, interim board was elected on the spot, with Frank as the acting president. Their first official act was to nullify every fine Brenda had ever issued and to launch a full audit of the HOA's finances. Brenda was stripped of her power, but she wasn't finished. I knew she wouldn't be. People like her don't just accept defeat. They double down. They escalate. I was prepared for it. The day after the meeting, I found a dead squirrel on my front porch. A few days later, my tires were slashed in the middle of the night. My cameras caught a hooded figure, but the quality wasn't good enough for a positive identification. It was petty, vindictive, and exactly what I expected. But then she went further. She started a smear campaign on a neighborhood social media app. She posted anonymous warnings about a dangerous man living on Oak Drive. She hinted at dark things, using loaded words and baseless innuendos. She was trying to paint me as a predator, a threat. This was a critical mistake on her part. Her previous attacks had been on my finances and my adherence to rules. This was an attack on my character, on my very identity as a father and a member of the community. It was the kind of accusation that could ruin a person's life, even if proven untrue. It was unforgivable. And it was the trigger for the final phase of my plan. I had been holding back the most powerful pieces of my arsenal. I had been content to remove her from the HOA, hoping that would be the end of it. But her vicious retaliation showed me that she was a cancer that needed to be cut out completely. That was when the whistleblower appeared. It was her husband, a meek, downtrodden man named George the First had only ever seen mowing their lawn with a defeated slump to his shoulders. He showed up at my door one evening, looking terrified. "I can't do it anymore," he stammered, wringing a baseball cap in his hands. "She's out of control. What she's saying about you, it's evil." He had seen my presentation at the HOA meeting. He said it was like a light had been switched on. He had lived under her thumb for 20 years, enabling her, afraid of her. But seeing her publicly exposed had given him a sliver of courage. "She keeps ledgers," he whispered, his eyes darting around nervously. "For the daycare. Every cash payment. Dates, names, amounts. She keeps them in a locked file cabinet in her office. She's so arrogant, she thinks no one would ever find them." He told me the combination to the file cabinet. I stopped him right there. "George, I appreciate this more than you know. But I can't and won't break into her house. That would make me the criminal. You, however, live there. You have a legal right to be in that office. And anything you find, you have a right to share." A look of understanding dawned on his face. He nodded slowly. "I see." 2 days later, a thick manila envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside were photocopies of 2 years' worth of handwritten ledgers. It was all there. Over $80,000 a year in undeclared cash income. It was meticulous, damning, and delivered to me by a person with the legal right to access it. It was the final, undeniable piece of the puzzle. It was time to call in the professionals. I compiled everything into a neat, organized package. I wrote a clear, concise summary of the events. I included the HOA documents, the video and photo evidence, the inspector's report clearing my name, the copies of Brenda's malicious complaints, George's ledgers, and a sworn affidavit from him about their authenticity. I made separate, tailored packages for each agency. The first package went to the State Department of Health and Human Services, Child Care Licensing Division. I sent it via certified mail, return receipt requested. The second package went to the City Code Enforcement Office, detailing the ongoing zoning violations that were now proven to be a commercial enterprise. The third, and most substantial package, went to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. I highlighted the all-cash business, the ledgers proving over $150,000 in unreported income, and her use of a false report against me as a form of intimidation. Tax evasion is one thing. Using the IRS as a weapon while committing tax evasion is the kind of thing that gets their attention in a big way. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. About a week later, on a Wednesday morning, it happened. I was in my office, watching my camera feeds on a secondary monitor as I worked. An unmarked sedan pulled up in front of Brenda's house. 2 people in business suits got out. They looked serious. They looked official. They knocked on her door. Brenda answered, a forced, sugary smile on her face. The smile vanished as they showed her their badges. They were from the IRS. They were there for a very long time. The next day, a van from the state's Child Care Licensing Division arrived, along with a city code enforcement officer. This time, the confrontation happened on her doorstep. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the gestures. Brenda was frantic, waving her arms, her voice getting louder and louder. The officials were calm, implacable, holding up clipboards and pointing at her house. They shut her down. They handed her a cease and desist order. The parents who arrived to drop off their children were met by a state official who explained that the facility was unlicensed and was being closed immediately. The looks of shock and anger on their faces were palpable. They had been entrusting their children to a fraud. The final act was set for the following week. I received a call from a detective with the local police department. They had received a referral from the state and the IRS. They were building a criminal case against her for tax fraud, operating an unlicensed business, and multiple child safety violations. My evidence had formed the core of their investigation. The detective asked if I would be willing to give a formal statement. I told him I would be happy to. The climax didn't happen at a dramatic HOA meeting. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning. I was watering the hydrangeas Sarah had planted years ago when two marked police cars pulled silently to the curb in front of Brenda's house. They walked up her pristine walkway, the one she used to measure everyone else's grass against. They knocked on the door. When she answered, they spoke to her calmly for a moment. Then, they turned her around and placed her in handcuffs. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just seemed to collapse, all the arrogant, furious energy gone out of her. She looked small and pathetic as they led her to the squad car. Just before they put her in the car, she saw me. Standing across the street, garden hose in hand. Our eyes met. Her face, which had been pale and slack, contorted into that familiar mask of rage. "You," she shrieked, her voice echoing in the quiet morning air. "You did this. You'll pay for this. You will be hearing from my lawyer." It was the same line she had used before, but this time it was hollow, impotent. A final, meaningless threat from a queen who had lost her throne. I just stood there, watching, as the car pulled away, taking the source of our neighborhood's misery with it. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel glee. I just felt quiet. The quiet I had been seeking all along. The satisfying silence of a problem solved. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The community, finally free of its tyrant, began to heal. The new HOA, led by Frank, was a model of reasonableness. They rewrote the covenants to be clear, fair, and focused on genuine issues like safety and property values, not the color of someone's welcome mat. The atmosphere in the neighborhood changed. People started talking to each other more. There were block parties. Kids' chalk drawings reappeared on the sidewalks. It felt like a community again. Brenda's fate was a matter of public record. She faced a mountain of charges. The tax evasion was the most serious. Faced with the evidence of her own meticulous ledgers, she had no defense. She pleaded guilty to avoid a trial. She was sentenced to 2 years in a federal correctional facility for tax fraud. She also faced hefty fines from the state for the unlicensed daycare and a slew of civil suits from the parents of the children she had cared for. To pay her legal fees and the massive back taxes and penalties owed to the IRS, she had to sell her house. The showcase home she had lorded over everyone was sold at a loss to a nice young family with a noisy, happy dog. George divorced her while she was awaiting sentencing. He provided a full statement to the prosecution, and in return, was not charged as an accomplice. The last I heard, he had moved to another state to start over, a free man for the first time in decades. With Brenda gone, the cloud over my own life lifted. The IRS audit was closed with a letter of apology for the inconvenience. The city sent a formal notice that the complaint against me was dismissed as unfounded. I was finally left in peace. Sometimes, Chloe and I will be sitting on the porch in the evening, and I'll look across the street at the house where Brenda used to live. I see the new family playing in the yard, and I feel a profound sense of satisfaction. Not a vengeful one, but a deep, engineering satisfaction. I had identified a critical structural failure in our community. I had analyzed its weaknesses, developed a plan, and executed a controlled demolition. And in its place, we had all built something better, something stronger. I never wanted this fight. I moved to Oak Haven seeking peace, not war. But I learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes, true peace isn't the absence of conflict, but the ability to face it, to stand up to the bullies and the tyrants, and to restore balance. I had protected my family and, in doing so, had liberated my neighbors. My life is quiet now. My work is fulfilling. My daughter is happy and safe. The foundation is solid. The structure is sound. And there are no more threats on the horizon. It's the kind of boring, predictable, wonderful life I had always wanted. And in the end, that was the most satisfying victory of all.